a shift. We need a pivot. We need some new thinking. Paradigms do not shift, for the most part, from the inside. Paradigms shift by external influence. And that's where you come in. For a large part, maybe I'll just ask at this point, how many people in the room currently can vote in a national or federal election? Okay, so the majority of people in this room cannot yet vote. I'm a very strong supporter of lowering the voting age to 16 in this country, and it's part of what my team is working on. Everybody who works for me in my Senate office is under the age of 30. Most of them are under the age of 25. So it's a way in which it helps me to understand and appreciate the concerns and the perspectives that young people bring to issues. Let's look for just a moment at the preamble of the Nuclear Ban Treaty. Words that are strong words. Some people might even say they're extreme words. Often when I would mark an essay when I was a professor, I would write in the margin, "You're exaggerating. Be careful with your language." But this treaty has words that one might consider to be extreme. They're extreme for a reason. And that reason is that the risk is extreme. The damage will be truly devastating. And so the preamble says things like, the preamble addresses the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons, and that any action has to transcend national borders, and that nuclear weapons pose grave implications for human survival. And I would only add to that, just parenthetically, it's not just human survival. It's our entire planet that is at risk. Another reason why we have such a strong link between the risk of nuclear weapons and the threat of climate change. So I've unpacked the language a little bit. As I close, I'll be asking you to look at postcards. I think they are, Claire, did we put them on people's tables, or what did we do with the postcards? There, you've got them? I've got them? Oh, they're right there. Okay. These are postcards that are generated by the non-governmental organization, the grassroots organization that led the movement that brought all of those country representatives at the UN into one room in July 2017, when Canada was not even in the room, and generated the first set of signatures and ratifications for the treaty. So, in order to get to that point, where all of those countries, more than 120 countries, were brought together in that one group in July, there had to be a series of resolutions in the United Nations General Assembly. Most recently, one in 2016, in order to adequately research and prepare the treaty. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, developing legislation is complex. It doesn't happen quickly, nor should it happen quickly. The implications for human beings in many different situations are such that we need to be understanding not only the obvious impact of legislation, but what maybe we didn't think about. Maybe because our life situation is very different from people who are in a different place, a different country even, and we need to understand, not just for the group that might be present in the room, but what about everybody else? Well, in that resolution that was needed in order to move ahead to actually presenting the Nuclear Ban Treaty, Canada actually voted against there being that movement forward. And it also sided very strongly with the United States in saying that nuclear weapons are essential for security, and in supporting what I'd already mentioned, the $1 trillion+ movement for, quote, modernization of nuclear weapons, which focuses just really more nuclear weapons, and there is no evidence whatsoever that the old nuclear weapons are not still working just fine in terms of destroying everything in large areas if they were detonated. So the kind of activism, the kind of civic engagement, if activism makes you nervous is a word, the civic engagement, the local leadership, the youth leadership that is absolutely essential, we've already seen some of that. And one of them in Canada is this Citizens Treaty that has traveled around the country, that has allowed people to sign. For a period of time it was on Parliament Hill, but it's been here in Winnipeg, it's traveled around the country, and I'm very sad to say that on the day that it was possible for parliamentarians to sign, I was actually the only senator who came out of our Senate bubble on the Hill and came out to sign the treaty and to stand with the civil society activists. That's not a good thing. That doesn't make me happy to have to tell you that. And it is one of the things that I hope to do as a parliamentarian. I'll never stop finding ways to bring this up in one manner or another in our parliament. And I really truly believe that the next opportunity we have, there'll be many more senators than just me who will be coming to sign and to really pay attention to the impact that nuclear weapons have by their existence, and then, God forbid, Creator forbid, by their actual detonation. Somehow, in all of this, Canada voting against in the actual resolution in 2016, Canada refusing to be even in the room for the discussions in 2017, somehow everybody forgot a unanimous resolution, exactly the same wording, unanimous in the House of Commons and unanimous in the Senate of Canada, that both of these houses of our Parliament unanimously adopted a resolution encouraging the Government of Canada, quote, to engage in negotiations for a nuclear weapons convention. Didn't happen, even though parliamentarians a few years before, and by the way, for those that ascribe importance to the political leanings of the government in power, that was in a period when Canada had a Prime Minister who was considered decidedly right-wing, Prime Minister Harper, and even then we had unanimous resolutions from both the House and the Senate. So we had 122 countries. And you know, that's interesting because right now, Canada is a candidate for one of the seats on the UN Security Council. The United States has one of the 5 permanent seats. So this is not an issue for the United States. It will, for the foreseeable future and all of the past 70 years that the Security Council has existed, the United States has had one of the 5 permanent positions, which is in effect a veto position on the Security Council. But Canada has to compete with the other 180 plus countries every couple of years to try and get a seat on the Security Council. We tried in 2010, we didn't make it. The last time that Canada's been on the UN Security Council was in 2000, when Lloyd Axworthy was our foreign minister and very ably represented Canada and brought in some very powerful positions to be considered by the Security Council. So 122 countries that signed on in support of this new nuclear ban treaty. Coincidentally, that's awfully close to the 128 countries that Canada needs to support it being elected to the Security Council. And yet, we seem to have a significant disconnect in understanding that when you go into the United Nations General Assembly, where all of the members of all the countries that are members of the UN are present, you are already in an assembly where the majority of the members of the UN actually support a nuclear ban treaty, support that this be brought into being and activated, and are in the process, country by country, in signing on and moving this to ratification. So we have quite a bit of commentary about how odd it is with all of these positive, proactive steps that Canada has taken under more than one party, both conservative and liberal leadership at the national level. The leadership of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's own father, Pierre Trudeau, and leading all the way up to the joint resolution that I've mentioned in both the House and the Senate, and yet we're not even in the room on this one. And so a lot of that commentary is trying to understand why. Why have we taken this position, and why does it make sense for Canada? And I'm sorry, I can't give you a rational explanation for that. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. So let's shift. Let's shift away from the old folks, the middle-aged folks, the diplomats, the governmental representatives who are currently controlling this agenda, and let's shift to you, to civil society and youth action and leadership. Well, I'd already mentioned the role of ICANN and the postcards. I'm actually wondering whether, as I'm speaking, maybe I could have a volunteer from each table, if you wouldn't mind. Just come up. The postcards are right here. They're in French and they're in English. So for Francophones, please feel welcome to opt for the French. Bring it back to your table for the members of your table, of your group. Take a look. Entirely up to you. This is one possible action. I wanted to give you something very straightforward and easy to implement if you were to decide that that was something you wanted to do. And by way of just explaining ICANN to you, you may recall that in 2017, the same year that the nuclear ban treaty was brought into that room in July, the same year that more than 120 country members of the UN supported moving ahead with this treaty, ICANN was the civil society organization that provided much of the leadership. In other words, what I'm saying is that it wasn't the diplomats of the UN who led on this initiative. So when we have civil society organizations, the largest of which, of course, is Rotary International, which played a significant leadership role in the founding of the United Nations, still has representative status at the United Nations. Organizations like this is where the impetus came from. It's really important not to give away our power, not to give away to those who hold titles or positions, but to work with them, even when we're in very different places, where our view of what needs to happen is considerably distant from what their view might be. Because remember, paradigms shift from the outside. And that's where civil society, and in particular youth leadership, comes in. So ICANN is not just one civil society organization, it's a coalition